Okay, guys, so I just want to welcome you to this part of physiology. So I want to say congratulations to you guys for making it to yet another semester in med school. I know it's not easy, but here you are. Okay, so initially I'd sent to you guys the timeline for physiology, that is MPG 222, MPG 222. So when you check that timeline, the first thing that we're going to be discussing in physiology is physiology of the blood. So we'll be discussing the blood. So, okay, so we're going to have number of lectures in this topic. So the first lecture that we're going to have, that's blood 1, and this is just the introductory lecture to blood physiology. Okay, so in this lecture 1 of blood physiology, of course, you know my names. And I know in this era of COVID-19, it's very difficult for us to be meeting. So hence, there will be a lot of videos that will be recording myself, and also I'll be having interactive classes with you. It could be on Zoom or other online platforms that we'll be using. So this is the recorded lecture that I've recorded for you guys so that you are able to listen and also be able to follow the PowerPoint that I've prepared for you. So most of these materials for physiology, you'll be able to find them when you go to Moodle. So just go to MU website and then you'll be able to access the materials that we'll be sending to you as lecturers, especially in physiology. We'll just be using Moodle. So make sure that you register as a student so that you'll be able to access all the information, the materials that we'll be posting there. Otherwise, I hope you'll be able to cope up with this new thing that we've come to agree that we should be using to deliver information to you as students. So we would also want to hear feedback from you after interacting for a number or a couple of lectures that we'll be having in physiology. Okay. So like I said, this is blood physiology and we're looking at lecture 1. So in this lecture 1, there are a number of things that we are going to be discussing. So we're going to have an introduction to blood physiology. Then we're also going to look at major components of physiology, properties of blood, and also functions of blood. Yeah. So we also have unit objectives. So at the end of blood physiology, what do you want to achieve as a student? So there are a number of objectives that we would want you to be able to achieve at the end of blood physiology. So the first one, of course, we would want to make sure that you as a student at the end of blood physiology unit, you should be able to describe cellular components of blood. Then you should also be able to explain the functions of blood, cellular components. So for each component of blood, what are their functions? You should be able to explain that. Then you should also be able to describe the formation of blood cells. Then you should also be able to explain ABO blood type system. So there are a lot of blood type systems that are out there, but the major one that we're interested in is the ABO blood type system. And of course, there are also other things that we'll be discussing here. So, but at the end of the unit, should be also be able to explain the ABO blood type system. Then you should also be able to explain the immunity associated with blood physiology. And then also you should be able to explain blood indices and the diseases. Okay, so basically these are the major unit objectives that you should be able to do at the end of our classes in blood physiology. Okay, so now let's start with the introduction. So blood is just a complex fluid that is consisting of plasma and the formed elements. So basically, blood is composed of plasma and the formed elements. This plasma is the extracellular fluid that is rich in proteins. So you have a lot of plasma proteins that are found within plasma. Then the formed elements, basically, you're talking of the cells. In these cells of blood, you have red blood cells, which are also called erythrocytes. Then you also have white blood cells, which are also called leukocytes. Then on top of that, you also have cell fragments that are called platelets. So the formed elements, you're talking of red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So you also have whole blood. So whole blood is just a suspension of cellular elements in plasma. So you have a suspension of cellular elements in plasma, then you're looking at the whole blood. Plasma in itself is a pale white watery solution of electrolytes. So you have plasma proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. So this plasma will contain electrolytes, plasma proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. So in general, the major color of plasma, the normal color is pale white watery solution. So it starts to look pale white. But sometimes there are certain conditions that will also change the color of plasma. So sometimes if you see there is change in the color of plasma, it will point to a certain condition or disease. For instance, if you're having pink colored plasma, that will mean that there is a presence of hemoglobin due to hemolysis. So if there is breakdown of red blood cells, and then now hemoglobin will be in plasma, and then you find that the color of plasma will change to pink colored plasma. So whenever you see pink colored plasma, just think of hemolysis, damage to red blood cells. And sometimes you can have plasma which looks like brown green color. So brown green color plasma will mean that there is elevated levels of bilirubin. So if you have so much bilirubin, then just not to say that the color of plasma will change to brown green. And sometimes it can be crowd plasma. Crowd plasma is due to certain conditions, and this condition in particular is called cryoglobulinemia. So this cryoglobulinemia is as a result of an increase in number of antibodies that are sensitive to temperature. So there are globulins, and these globulins are sensitive to temperature. So with an increase in these antibodies, then the color of plasma will change to cloudy plasma. Then when you get whole blood, then you spin it or you centrifuge it. You find that the cells which are denser than plasma, they will settle at the bottom of a test tube or the capillary tube. So you can see here that red blood cells will settle down. Then after that, there is a portion which is called Buffy coat. This is where you find a lot of white blood cells and platelets. Then on top, you have plasma. So the major part of blood, you have plasma, which will contribute about 55% of the whole blood. And then the 45% are the elements, mainly you're talking of red blood cells and these white blood cells and platelets. Okay, so now let's look at properties of blood. What are the properties of blood? So let's start by looking at pH of blood. So what is the normal pH of blood? So the normal range of pH of blood is between 7.35 to 7.45. Okay, so the normal range of pH of blood is 7.35 to about 7.45. And this pH is slightly alkaline, but you like to say that the venous blood normally has a lower pH than the arterial blood. This is because of the presence of carbon dioxide. So you know to say that the venous blood will be more acidic as compared to arterial blood. Why? Is because the venous blood will have more of carbon dioxide, and you know to say that this carbon dioxide is a waste product that is coming from the cells. That's why you find that the amount or the presence of carbon dioxide is more in the venous blood, and this carbon dioxide can react with water, forming carbonic acid, and the carbonic acid, you know, it's unstable, so it will dissociate into bicarbonates and hydrogen ions. So there will be an increase in hydrogen ions on the venous side. So when you have an increase in hydrogen on the venous side, you know to say that pH is the negative logarithm of hydrogen ions. So with an increase in hydrogen ions, there will be a decrease in pH. So that's why I'm saying that the venous blood normally has a low or a lower pH than arterial blood. The other property is temperature. So the temperature of blood is about 38 degrees Celsius. And this 38 degrees Celsius is about 1 degree Celsius higher than the oral or the rectal body temperature. So the normal temperature that is taken, mainly we use oral temperature and rectal temperature. So just not to say when you're taking temperature from a patient, whatever recording that you're going to get as oral temperature or rectal temperature, the temperature of blood should be 1 degree Celsius higher than that. So if you get 36, just not to say that blood will be 37. If you get 37, they just not to say that blood temperature will be 38. So in simple terms, just not to say that the temperature of blood is normally 1 degree Celsius higher than the oral or the rectal temperature. The other property is viscosity. So viscosity, basically you're looking at the thickness of blood. So viscosity means thickness or resistance to flow. So blood is about 3 to 5 times denser and more viscous than water and feels slightly sticky. So the viscosity is increased because of the presence of red blood cells and plasma proteins. So because you have these red blood cells, erythrocytes, and plasma proteins, you expect that blood viscosity should be higher than that of water. That's why many people say that blood is thicker than water. So yeah, maybe they don't know what they mean when they say that, but physiologically speaking, you realize to say that in blood you have cells and plasma proteins. So the viscosity is higher as compared to water, about 3 to 5 times denser than water. Okay, so the plasma proteins that are contributing to high viscosity of blood mainly is fibrinogen. So you have fibrinogen, which is one of coagulating factors that is being produced by the liver. So it's a plasma protein that is produced by the liver. So because this fibrinogen can result into sticking of other cells, so you find that the viscosity increases because of plasma proteins and blood cells. Then looking at the color of blood, the color of blood vary with the oxygen content. So depending on how much oxygen is in blood, then you have a particular color of blood. So for instance, arterial blood is bright red due to its high level of oxygen. So you have more oxygen on the arterial side as compared to the venous side. So because of that, this oxygen that can bind to hemoglobin, you find that to give you that bright red color as opposed to the venous blood that is giving off oxygen to the tissues, so you don't have much of oxygen on the venous side. So you find that the color of blood there, it has got a darker red color as opposed to the arterial blood, like I said. The amount of blood it also depends with the weight of a person. So in general, the amount of blood is about 8% of your body weight or your body mass. So the heavier you are, the more blood you have. So blood constitutes about 20% of extracellular fluid. So you have the extracellular fluid, which is composed of interstitial and plasma in general. But here now, when you're looking at the total extracellular fluid, which is about 14 liters, 20% of that is blood. And so this will amount to about 80% of body mass. So the blood volume is more in male as compared to female. So in male, you have blood volume on average 5 to 6 liters. Then in female, it's about 4 to 5 liters. So in male, 5 to 6 liters, it's almost equivalent to 1.5 gallons of blood, as opposed to females, which is about 1.2 gallons. And you know the conversion from liters to gallons. So 1 gallon, it's almost equivalent to 3.75 liters. Okay, so main point here is that males, they have more blood as compared to females, which makes sense, right? Because just think of it. Males, they have uh, higher muscle mass, or in terms of muscles, you have more muscles than females. So you need more oxygen to be carried to these muscles. So because you need more oxygen, you need more of these cells that are transporting the oxygen. So it just makes perfect sense that males should have more red blood cells or more blood as compared to females, okay, for that function. Okay, but it's also about the genetic makeup. In males, you find that they'll have more blood as compared to the females. Moving on, let's discuss the composition of blood. What are the major components of blood? So to some extent, we've already touched the components of blood, but just going in detail now. So like I said, the whole blood is about 8% of your body weight. Then the 92% is for other fluids and tissues of the body. So when you centrifuge blood, like I said, it will separate into plasma and red blood cells. So you have the elements down there, then you have plasma. So you have plasma here, then you have the elements down here, starting with the Buffy coat, where you're going to find lots of white blood cells and platelets. Then down here you have red blood cells. But as you're spinning here, when you're checking at the bottom of the capillary tube or the test tube, you find that there will be a bit of plasma and white blood cells that will be trapped there, but the amount is negligible, so you don't really account for it. Okay. So now when you're looking at the portion where you have these formed elements, the portion where you have the cells, it's called the hematocrit. So in other way, the hematocrit is the fraction of the blood that is occupied by red blood cells. So I come again, I said the hematocrit. Hematocrit is a fraction of whole blood that is occupied by the red blood cells. So it's this portion here. It's called the hematocrit. So the normal hematocrit, you expect it to be higher in male as compared to females because they have more blood. You also find that they have more of red blood cells, so the hematocrit will be more in males as compared to females. So under normal circumstances, it's a range. So for males, you find that hematocrit will be between 40 to 45, but for females, it's less than that. It's in between 45 and slightly less than in males. So we'll look at that in detail later on. So the composition of plasma, the composition of blood is divided into plasma and the formed elements. Plasma is 55%. This plasma is composed of plasma proteins, which is 7%. So when you're looking at total plasma, if you say total plasma is 100%, then out of that 100%, the 7% is plasma proteins, then 91.5% is water, then other solutes will constitute about 1.5%. So the plasma proteins, you have different types of plasma proteins. So these 7%, you have the plasma protein. And the plasma proteins, the total plasma proteins, you have more of albumin. Albumin is about 54% of total plasma proteins. Then you have globulins, which is about 38%. Then you have fibrinogen, which is about 7%, and the other plasma proteins who constitute about 1%. Then in the other solutes here, you're talking of electrolytes. Remember, in the extracellular fluid, you have electrolytes like sodium, magnesium, potassium, calcium, just to mention a few. So you have these electrolytes. Then you also have nutrients. Nutrients, you're talking of glucose, you're talking of fatty acids, amino acids. So you have these nutrients. Then you also have gases like oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, that is also found in plasma. Then you also have regulatory substances. And these regulatory substances, you're talking of enzymes, some of them are hormones that are produced by the glandular cells that needs to be transported to other parts of the body. Then you also have waste products that are coming from cells, as waste products from metabolism of the cells. So all these are other solids that you can find in plasma, which is about 1.5%. Then you have the formed elements. These formed elements, you have these cells. So now you're talking of red blood cells and the white blood cells. So the formed elements, it's about 45% of the whole blood. So what are these cells now? So you have cells like white blood cells and red blood cells, and also platelets. So platelets are not basically cells, but they are more of fragmentation of a cell. That cell is called megakaryocyte. Later on, we'll look at how these platelets are developed. Okay, so the other name for platelets, they are also called thrombocytes. And these thrombocytes, the process by which they are formed is called thrombocytosis. Thrombocytosis or thrombopoiesis. Yeah, so they are also called. The process in which platelets are formed is called thrombopoiesis. So the quantity of these platelets is between 150,000 to 400,000 platelets per microliter of blood. So there are a lot of these platelets. Imagine you have 150,000 to 400,000 platelets per microliter of blood. Then white blood cells, there are about 5,000 to 10,000 white blood cells per microliter of blood. Red blood cells, they are between 4.5 to 5.4 million red blood cells per microliter of blood. The white blood cells, you have different types of white blood cells. So you have neutrophils, which are the majority of white blood cells in circulation. So if you get peripheral blood, then you check for white blood cells, you find that the majority of them are neutrophils. So neutrophils are between 60 to 70% of total white blood cells. And then you have followed by lymphocytes in numbers or percentages. Lymphocytes, they are between 20 to 25%. Then monocytes, 3 to 8%. Eosinophil, it's between 2 to 4%. And then basophils, it's between 0.5 to about 1%. So the majority of white blood cells are neutrophils, followed by lymphocytes, then monocytes, eosinophils, basophils. So these cells, they are different in terms of structure. So you can see this diagram here. You have the red blood cells, then you have white blood cells. And here you can see platelets. So the white blood cells, they are different depending on the structure and the way they will pick up a stain. So there's this scientist that discovered a stain which is called right stain. So the right stain was discovered by James Hammer. So James Hammer is the one who discovered the stain for differentiating red blood cells. Then this stain is somehow similar to Romanowski stain, the one that you use mostly in microbiology. So these stains, you will find them. So when we are doing a lab on blood physiology, we use some of these stains, the right stain and also Romanowski stain. So you can see when you use these stains, you have different types of white blood cells, depending on how they pick up this stain. So you have these white blood cells that end with a "phil", like eosinophil, basophil, neutrophil. So like I said, in physiology, wherever you see a "phil", it means there's affinity for something or there's love for something. So if you have eosinophil, it means that these cells, they contain granules, and these granules, they have affinity for allicin. This allicin is found within the stem, and the allicin is red in color. So the allicin is the acidic part of the stem, and then you also have the basic part of the stem, which has got a color of menthrine blue. So the menthrine blue is another part of the stem, which is basic. So these granules that are found within these white blood cells, so these white blood cells that have granules, they're called granular white blood cells, or granulocytes if you want. So they're also called granulocytes because they contain granules. So there are 3 granulocytes. So you have the eosinophil that will pick up the allicin in the stem, the right stem. Then you have the basophil. So the granules, they have affinity for the basic part of the stain. So they will stain blue, like you have seen here, dark blue. Then you have the neutrophil. So the granules here, they don't necessarily pick up a specific part of the stain because they are neutral, so they can pick up red or blue. Okay, but the only way you can differentiate neutrophil from the other cells, eosinophil and basophil, is by looking at the nucleus. So the nucleus of a neutrophil is segmented. So you're going to have 2 to 5 lobes, and these lobes are connected by a thin chromatin, like here. But eosinophil, mainly they only have 2 lobes that are connected by a thick segment here of chromatin that is connecting the 2 lobes. Then you have the granulocytes. Granulocytes, they don't have granules. So you have the monocyte and the lymphocytes. So these are the formed elements. You're talking of cells that are found within blood. Okay, so now let's look at plasma in detail. So like I said, when formed elements are removed from blood, a straw-colored liquid called plasma protein is left. So we call blood plasma is left. So when formed elements are removed from blood, a straw-colored liquid called blood plasma is left. So the table below just describes the chemical composition of blood plasma. So blood plasma, like I said, you have components of blood plasma, which is composed of mainly water. water is 91.5%, and this water is just a liquid portion of blood, and it will act as a solvent and suspending medium for components of blood. It also absorbs and also transports and releases heat. So this water is also contributing to thermoregulatory property of blood. So blood is also involved in thermoregulation. So in the talking of releasing of heat, how it's because when it's very hot, you know, to say that the blood vessels that are near the skin, they will dilate. So you're going to have vasodilatation when it's very hot, so that blood can flow near the skin. So as blood is flowing near the skin, you're also losing heat to the environment via conduction. So you have heat conduction. So you start losing heat to the outside. Then in terms of transporting, so there are a lot of nutrients, a lot of metabolites, a lot of gases that are transported. And then it can also absorb nutrients, for instance, from the GIT. So those nutrients will be absorbed and transported by the water part of plasma. Then you have plasma proteins, which will contribute about 7% of total plasma. So these plasma proteins, mainly their function is to provide colloidal osmotic pressure, or which is also called oncotic pressure. So you will see that this osmotic pressure or oncotic pressure is the one that will maintain water balance between blood and the tissues, and then it will also regulate blood volume. So when you're talking of oncotic pressure, because you know to say that these plasma proteins are charged molecules, because of that, they can attract water molecules. So they're going to maintain water within the cardiovascular system, so that as blood is moving, it's also moving with the water. So it's very important to have these plasma proteins, because they'll provide osmotic pressure or oncotic pressure, which is about 22 millimeter of mercury. Then different parts of plasma proteins, or different types of plasma proteins, like we have already mentioned them. So you have the first one is albumin. So albumin is the smallest plasma protein and is the most numerous blood plasma protein. So it's produced by the liver, and its major function is involved in transportation. So transportation of several hormones like steroid hormones and also fatty acids. So most of these substances that I'm mentioning here are fat soluble. So they are not water soluble. They can't dissolve in water that is found in plasma. So the only way they can be transported is by binding to plasma proteins. So this albumin is providing means by which these fat soluble can bind to albumin, and then it can easily be transported uh, within plasma. Otherwise, without that, they can't dissolve in water. Then you have globulins. Globulins are produced by the liver, and some of the globulins are produced by plasma cells or lymphocytes or white blood cells. So these globulins, for instance, those that are produced by plasma cells or B cells, are called immunoglobulins. So some of those immunoglobulins are produced by plasma cells or B cells. So these plasma cells, they develop from B lymphocytes. So once B lymphocytes are activated for some reason, then they will be transformed into plasma cells, and now they'll start producing immunoglobulins as examples of globulins. And these immunoglobulins will act as antibodies or antibodies that will now start attacking viruses and bacteria. So you have alpha beta globulins that will also function as a transport mechanism for iron. So they can transport iron. They can also transport lipids and fat soluble vitamins. So globulins can also function as a way in which other substances can be transported within the blood. Then you have fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is basically produced by the liver, And by now you understand to say fibrinogen is important when it comes to hemostasis or blood clotting, the mechanism that we will discuss later on as we go on with our lectures in blood physiology. Then the other solutes, which is about 1.5%. So you have these electrolytes. Okay. So the electrolytes are inorganic salts. For instance, we have inorganic salts. Some of them are positively charged. That would include maybe sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Then you also have negatively charged ions, which are called anions, and these would include chloride, hydrogen phosphates, sulfur tetraoxide, bicarbonates. So these also help to maintain osmotic pressure. So because they are charged, they can also attract water molecules. So they also help to maintain osmotic pressure. Then they play an essential role in function of cells. For instance, when you're talking of communication of cells, you're talking of the movement of these electrolytes that are involved in action potentials. So for cells to communicate or to function normally, you also need these electrolytes. So the electrolytes can come from plasma or they are within the cell. So there's exchange of these electrolytes between plasma and the cells. Then as part of other solutes, you also have nutrients. So nutrients are products that are coming from digestion, from the GIT. So these products of digestion will pass into blood for distribution to all body cells. So there are a lot of nutrients that are coming from the GIT. So how do they get transported? So these nutrients will be transported by blood to other cells. Then these nutrients will include amino acids from proteins, you have glucose from carbohydrates, fatty acids, glycerol from triglycerides, and vitamins and also minerals. So these are the nutrients that are found in plasma. Then you also have gases, oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen. So you have more oxygen, which is associated with the hemoglobin inside the red blood cells. And then you also have more of carbon dioxide, which is dissolved in plasma and is also transported as such. Then you have some amount of nitrogen, which is also present in blood, but its function in the body is not known at the moment. It's not well known or documented, the function of nitrogen. Then you also have regulatory substances in form of enzymes that are produced by cells that are catalyzing chemical reactions. In order to speed up chemical reactions, you need these enzymes as regulatory substances. And then you also have hormones that are produced by endocrine glands. So these endocrine glands are producing hormones, and these hormones will regulate metabolism, the growth, and also development of the body. Then you have vitamins that will also act as cofactors for these enzymatic reactions. So some of the enzymes will require the presence of vitamins for them to operate as cofactors. Then you have also waste products as part of plasma. These waste products are coming from metabolism from the cells. Most are broke down products of protein metabolism and are carried by blood to organs of excretion. So, excuse me. So most of these waste products that are coming from the cells, they'll be transported by plasma itself or by blood to organs that are involved in excretion. For instance, certain substances will be transported to the kidneys for filtration. Later on, it will appear in the urine, and some of it is transported to the liver for metabolism, and then it will be added into bowel salts or part of the bowel. Then some of it can be metabolized by the lungs. Okay, so these are organs that are involved in excretion of certain things. Okay, so enough with plasma. Let's look at the cells, which are called formed elements. So formed elements, basically we're looking at the cells. So a bit on the formed elements so that you know which cells are found in blood, what are the major functions. So this is just an introductory lecture. So later on, we'll go in detail so that we look at how these red blood cells are formed, how white blood cells are formed, how platelets are formed. Okay. So when you're talking of formed elements, you're talking of the cells. So the first one are red blood cells, which are also called erythrocytes. So erythrocytes or white blood cell or red blood cells, like I said, they are more in males as compared to females. So in females, on average, it's about 4.8 million per microliter of blood. In males, they are more in terms of quantity. It's about 5.4 million per microliter of blood. Sometimes it can even be 6 million per microliter of blood. The characteristics of red blood cells in terms of size, it's between 7 to 8 micrometer per diameter. So I mean, the red blood cells in terms of size, they're between 7 to 8 micrometer in diameter, and they biconcave, or they look like a disc in terms of shape. They don't have nuclei, so they are without nuclei, and they live for about 120 days. So red blood cells, they can survive for about 120 days. In terms of function, red blood cells, they contain a lot of hemoglobin, and this hemoglobin within red blood cells is the one that is involved in transportation of oxygen and the other oxygen, and also part of carbon dioxide in the blood. So I find that hemoglobin can transport oxygen, and then sometimes it can also transport carbon dioxide. So depending whether you're looking at arterial side or the venous side. So on the arterial side, you have more of hemoglobin oxygen interaction. On the venous side, you also have more of hemoglobin and carbon dioxide interaction. White blood cells, so we have different types of white blood cells. So starting with granular cells. So these white blood cells, they are also called leukocytes in general. So in terms of numbers, like we said, they are between 5,000 to 10,000 white blood cells per microliter. Then characteristics, most they live for a few hours to a few days. So they can survive for a few hours and few days, depending on the type of white blood cells. For instance, you have lymphocytes like B and T lymphocytes, being memory cells that can live for many years. So have these white blood cells that can survive for many years. Why? Because, for instance, if you have an infection, a bacterial infection that is caused by a certain bacteria, so the body is going to develop an immunity, then there will be a pocket of memory cells, B memory cells, that will stay within the body, so that later on, when you are infected by the same bacteria that can cause the same disease, you find by then you'll be immune. Why? Because you have the memory cells that can easily develop antibodies and fight that pathogen. Okay, so need to be there for many years. That's why there are certain diseases that you can get infected once in your lifetime. Once you develop the immunity, you'll be able to fight the pathogen. For instance, measles, you can only get the disease once and for all. Once you recover, then you have the immunity against measles. Sometimes it can be due to vaccination. Then the major function of white blood cells is to combat pathogen and other foreign substances that enter the body. Then examples of white blood cells, let's start with granular leukocytes. So the granular leukocytes, you're talking of those with granules. So they're also called granulocytes. The first one is neutrophils, which are the majority. In terms of percentages, they're between 60 to 70% of all white blood cells. Size, they're big, between 10 to 12 micrometer in diameter. So they're bigger than red blood cells. They have nucleus, and this nucleus is segmented nucleus that will have 2 to 5 lobes that are connected by a thin strand of chromatin, like I said. So the cytoplasm has very fine, pale, and lilac granules. So you can see in the cytoplasm here, you have these granules that are lilac in color. So these granules, once you see the fine, pale, lilac granules, then you're looking at a neutrophil. But the major mark that you'll be able to tell that this is a neutrophil is probably by looking at the nucleus. So if you have the nucleus that is segmented, and then you have more than 2 to 5, if you have like 2 to 5 lobes, then just not say looking at a neutrophil with the presence of the granules. The major function of neutrophils, they're involved in phagocytosis, so they are phagocytes or phagocytic cells. So they're involved in phagocytosis, destruction of bacteria with ribosomes. So they're loaded with a lot of ribosomes. And these ribosomes, they contain different types of enzymes that are capable of digesting almost anything, be it carbohydrate, protein, lipid, and fat, or nucleic acid. They are able to digest that. So once they are able to phagocytose a bacteria or a virus, then they will release these enzymes that will destroy or digest the pathogen. So they also have defensins. These are proteins that are involved in defense. And then they also contain strong oxidants, such as superoxide ion. Then they also contain hydrogen peroxide and hypochlorite anion. So all these can destroy pathogens. And then you have eosinophils. Eosinophils, they have those granules that are red in color. In terms of numbers, they're between 2 to 4% of all blood cells. Then characteristics, they are also big, about 10 to 12 micrometer in diameter. The nucleus, they have mainly 2 lobes, which are connected by a thick strand of chromatin. So they also contain large red, orange granules that will fill the cytoplasm. So you can see the granules there. In terms of function, they're involved in elimination of parasites. So elimination of parasites such as worms, which are too big to be phagocytosed. So they will produce toxins that will destroy, or proteins that will destroy parasites in terms of worms. So if you have a patient, when you check, you have a lot of eosinophils, that would also tell that maybe that patient is having some worms. Okay, the body, especially in the GIT. Okay, so they are also phagocytic, and then they are also involved in antigen antibody complexes. So they are antigen presenting cells. Then they can combat the effect of histamine in allergic reactions. So they are also involved in allergic reactions. Okay, to oppose the effect of these allergic reactions. Basophils, so you have the granules that look blue in color. So they're the least in terms of white blood cells. In terms of percentage, it's about 0.5 to 1% of total white blood cells. In diameter, they're small. They're between 8 to 10 micrometer in diameter, and the nucleus has got 2 lobes. And then you have large cytoplasmic granules that will also appear deep blue purple in color. Their functions, they liberate heparin. In this heparin, it has got anticoagulant factor or anticoagulant function. So it will inhibit coagulation because of this heparin. So it can also produce or release histamine and serotonin in allergic reactions, and that will also intensify on the overall inflammatory response. Then you have a granular leukocytes. So granular leukocytes, these are white blood cells without the granules. So you have lymphocytes and monocytes. The lymphocytes have different types of lymphocytes. You have T lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, natural killer cells, and also dendritic cells. So in terms of numbers, they are between 20 to 25% of total white blood cells. Then there you have two types. You have small lymphocytes, and then you also have large lymphocytes, depending on the size. So you have the small lymphocytes that are between 8 to 9 micrometer in diameter, and the large ones, they're between 10 to 14 micrometer in diameter. They have a big nucleus, so the nucleus is round and slightly indented. So the cytoplasm forms like a rim. So you can see a rim of the cytoplasm, which is blue in color. Okay, so when you're looking at these cells, the bigger the cell, the bigger the cytoplasm. So the cytoplasm is quite small because of the big nucleus that is found within these lymphocytes. So they are the medium in immune response, so including antigen antibody reactions. So antigen antibody reactions, they are also antigen presenting cells. So you have the B cells that will develop into plasma cells later on, and the plasma cells now start producing or secreting antibodies, and these antibodies are the ones that will attack the viruses, the cancer cells, and sometimes they can also attack transplanted tissue. So if you have a transplant from another person, you have a tissue that has been transplanted into you, these cells, the lymphocytes, they can react to that, or they can fight that because it's considered as foreign. That's why when you're doing a transplant, you need to suppress the immune system so that you don't have much of these cells attacking the tissue that you have introduced into this person. Then you have the natural killer cells that will attack a wide variety of infectious microbes and also certain spontaneous arising tumor cells. So the tumor cells will be also attacked by the natural killer cells. The monocytes, they have a nucleus. You can see here in terms of number, between 3 to 8% of all white blood cells. Then in terms of size, they are the biggest. The monocytes are the biggest in terms of size. They're between 12 to 20 micrometer in diameter. The nucleus is kidney shaped, so you can see the nucleus, which is kidney shaped. And you have the cytoplasm, which is blue gray and has a foamy appearance. So you can see the foamy appearance of the cytoplasm. In terms of function, they will act on the hypothalamus, sometimes causing a rise in body temperature. So when you have microbial infection or bacterial infection, you find that the monocytes are the ones that will go and stimulate the hypothalamus to cause rise in body temperature in terms of fever, because to say when you're fighting these microbes, if you increase the body temperature, then the microbes won't operate well in high temperature. Hence, they'll be more prone to other cells, or the immunity will be destroyed very fast. And the monocytes, they can also stimulate the production of some globulins by the liver, and also enhance the production of activated T lymphocytes that are involved in phagocytosis. And they're also involved in phagocytosis. Platelets, thrombocytes, they are between 150 and 400,000 platelets per microliter. So you have, in terms of diameter, they're the smallest. They are between 2 to 3 micrometer in diameter. And these are just fragments of cells, and these cells are called eukaryocytes. So have a lot of these platelets. The major function, they're involved in hemostasis. So they're involved in the formation of platelet plug in hemostasis. So they release chemicals, especially cytokines, that will now result into vascular spasm and also blood clotting. Okay, hemopoiesis or hematopoiesis, these are stages that are involved in production or development of blood cells. So you have pluripotent stem cell that can differentiate into different types of blood cells. So this will be blood lecture 2, so I won't waste much time here, but just not to say within the bone marrow, so you have two types of bone marrow. You have red bone marrow and the yellow bone marrow. The red bone marrow, this is where you find these hematopoietic stem cells that can differentiate into other blood cells. Then yellow marrow, yellow marrow, you don't really have much of these stem cells, but this is where you find much of fat. That's why it's yellow. So the one that is involved in development of white blood cells, red blood cells, the red bone marrow. Okay, the major final thing that we'll discuss in this class is the functions of blood. So the functions of blood, starting with transportation. Okay, so blood is involved in transportation. So it involves gases that are transported, nutrients that are carried from the GIT to other cells, like I mentioned. Then also transportation of hormones, enzymes. These hormones are coming from the endocrine glands. Then transportation of metabolic waste, okay, to the kidneys for excretion, or to the liver for metabolism, or to the lungs for excretion or metabolism. Then the other major functions of blood is regulation. So it's involved in regulating the pH. Like we mentioned that within blood you have buffer systems that are involved to regulate the pH, because these hormones, these enzymes of the body, they operate within the optimum pH. So you need to maintain the pH within 7.35 to 7.45, the normal pH. Okay, so blood is also involved to adjust and maintains body temperature. Like we said, it's involved in thermoregulation. Then blood is also involved in maintenance of water content of the cells. So if cells are dehydrated, you find that water will move from blood to the cells. Or if the cells are if the cells they have more water, becoming more hydrated, there is overhydration of the cells, and water can move from the cells to the blood. Okay, and then protection, you're talking of mainly immunity and also hemostasis. So immunity, you have white blood cells that are involved to protect the body against these pathogens, and also you have the blood system itself working as a reservoir for substances like water, electrolytes, and it also performs hemostasis. So you have those plasma proteins, for instance, fibrinogen that is involved in hemostasis. So blood is also involved in hemostasis. So thank you very much. That will be all for this introductory lecture.